Iran has been suffering chronic dry spells for years, and to tackle the herculean task of getting over it is not going to be an easy feat for a relatively new president. But by 11/11, Iran's Ebrahim Raeisi had met representatives from Isfahan, Yazd and Semnan provinces, promising to resolve water issues. It's a nationwide problem that burst into protests in the southwestern province of Khuzestan in July, and recently in Isfahan, and next, its neighboring province of Charmahal Bakhtiyari. What might the government actually do about the problem? For answers, stay with me, Leila Faramarzi, on Iran Today. Nearly half of the million residents of Charmahal and Bakhtiyari are known to be struggling for consistent potable water. Nearly 200 of the province's villages receive their potable water through tankers delivered to them. Goes without say, water for agriculture is also hard to come by, and it's agriculture most jobs in the province are owed to. Thing is, the solution doesn't sound like much of a solution to environmentalists or economists. Mr. Fadai Fard is the former director of the Comprehensive Water Management Plan. Here's what he shared with us.
اولین راهکار چی هست؟ این که ما
The first solution is for us to create non-water-based jobs. Although it's not possible in the short term, we need to focus on other potentials available in the country. The second issue is, as you might know, when a farmer can't secure his family's livelihood, he has no other option but to protest. It's a fact that we don't have water to give them. But we need to offset that with credit and financial resources. Another solution that I think might be helpful in the long run is to eliminate the subsidies to make the prices real. Although it might affect the situation even more heavily, this might potentially solve many problems.
Experts tend to agree the government's discussed projects are too high cost and ambitious to deliver on, those being the transfer of water from the Caspian Sea in the north and the Persian Gulf in the south. Economists believe bringing desalinated water to the southern provinces on the Persian Gulf would cost too much. Also, it is not sustainable. Environmentalists agree that such an endeavor would lead to deforestation and hurt the biodiversity of the region. That's because it would require harmful piping, be it underground or even above-ground pipes installed. Mr. Mahbub Far is an environmental scientist who joined us on Skype. Let's hear him out.
I believe that any water transmission between different zones in the country must be stopped. The other solution I suggest is that deep water wells that are used to drain underground water resources must be deemed illegal and be shut immediately. All water extraction from the wells must be stopped.
The president does agree it ain't that simple. At a cabinet meeting November the 21st, he said addressing the water shortages is not limited to the Ministry of Energy, and that problems with shortages in the country have various dimensions, calling for a comprehensive approach.
در دولت‌های مختلف همه اشتغال آب محور بود.
Throughout the years, all administrations have been focusing on water-based jobs, including agriculture. The governments constructed either dams or water networks and transmission systems and others. As you might know, over 90% of the country's renewable water is being used in an inefficient agricultural sector. On the other hand, we have relocated water-intensive industries to dry regions. Also, we have created political, social and economic facilities in the metropolitan areas that, despite warnings and recommendations, unfortunately increase the concentration of the population there.
که متاسف.
Some rurals have been getting water to drink from puddles on the ground, as observed by Ali Nazemi. That's an Iranian hydrologist who spoke to Climate Home News. But then, the country's average temperature has increased by 2 centigrade since the 1960s, and rainfall has decreased 20% in the last 20 years, according to Iran's meteorological agency. And we have yet more frequent and severe heat waves, droughts and floods to look forward to. Sanctions, international and American, haven't helped the situation. Self-sufficiency may be good, but sanctions have caused the Iranian government to look to self-sufficiency, which has caused over 90% of this country's water to be used for agriculture. That can be self-contradictory, especially as farmers have been encouraged to grow water-intensive crops like wheat, rice and sugarcane. Mr. Akhani is a university professor and environmental activist. As he shared his views with me in a Tehran park, he pointed out some drought-stricken plants.
In any case, drought is a feature of Iran's climate. What made the matters worse have been our actions. Without accepting that Iran is a dry country, we have increased water consumption by developing agriculture and cultivating water-intensive crops and expanding rice fields. In Isfahan, we have about 20 hectares of rice fields.
Iranian officials have gone as far as acknowledging that outdated irrigation and agricultural systems, as well as poor water management policies over the past 3 decades, have contributed to water shortages in the country. But poor management is a pretty murky description of the detail of what's been going on. To go by expert opinion, I have right here.
Dam construction is inevitable for a country like Iran that has an arid and semi-arid climate. This is very important. We can't even imagine a country like Iran without dams. But the main problem in the country is improper dam construction.
There's no question water shortages have been made worse by the building of hydroelectric dams like those on Khuzestan's Karun River. The water collects in reservoirs and evaporates due to the intense and worsening heat of the desert-hot south.
The Ministry of Energy established a structural water management in Iran and began to build too many dams. These dams are now the scourge of this land because rivers naturally distribute water fairly. When we built the dams, we made water distribution unfair.
Authorities have released water from these dams to ease the scarcity in response to protests. And 33 new water and sewage projects are under construction in the province, and some water resources are left untapped or sent to other parts of Iran. Neither central arid lands of rich architecture nor frontier lines are exempt. One ecosystem under particular strain is the Hur al-Azim wetland. That's on the border of Iran and Iraq. It's since the 1980s that the marshes have been dried out due to the building of upstream dams and being opened to oil exploration. And the wetland now covers just over half of its former area.
There's a dam being constructed in Kohkili and Boir Ahmad province called Chamshir, which, like the dam in Gotwand, is being built on a salty foundation. I've recently studied that and talked about it to the media. Trillions of tumans are going to the construction of the dam. If the budget was used in the deprived province to promote handicrafts or help small industries, if they paid that sum to invest in software development and so on, much more could have been done. Promoting tourism would have attracted a lot of money.
In other areas of the country, farmers do not have enough water to grow their crops, and the overuse of aquifers ensuing has led to subsidence and sinkholes. Now that's a horrendous hazard, described as a silent earthquake and silent death. Land subsidence is a gradual settling or sudden sinking of the Earth's surface due to the subsurface movement of Earth materials. It is mainly caused by, say, aquifer system compaction, drainage, and decomposition of organic soils, underground mining, and oil and gas extraction. Iran, having the highest withdrawal of aquifers, suffers an average rate of land subsidence of up to 25 centimeters per year. The irreparable phenomenon intensifies damage inflicted by other natural incidents such as earthquakes and floods. It gets to destroy not just agriculture, but cultural and ancient monuments, as well as modern roads and transportation systems. The total damage caused by subsidence worldwide is estimated at billions of dollars annually. In Iran, out of 606 plains, more than 300 are in acute condition. It comes as no surprise, as 80% of the groundwater is withdrawn annually in Iran, outpacing the global rate. Globally, water resources withdrawal is between 3 to 20%. 40 to 60% withdrawal is problematic, so Iran, with its 80%, is in crisis.
The mistakes started when we earned oil revenues. We earned money without making any efforts for it. That resulted in two outcomes. One was the deepening class divide, and the other was the expansion of the government. The government and its inner circle have always enjoyed access to the financial resources, which resulted in their expansion. On the other hand, the government is responsible for managing water resources as stipulated by law.
Programs currently foreseen to compensate, which have also been implemented, include groundwater reclamation and a balancing project. What's important is that funds are continuously allocated to these projects to make them operational, hard to achieve as they may seem. Some 29 out of 31 provinces are currently at risk of subsidence, according to Gholam Ali Jafarzadeh, head of the National Cartography Center.
At some point, prominent politicians in some provinces like Isfahan, Kerman and elsewhere transferred industries that were planned for southern Iran along the Sea of Oman to Isfahan, Kerman, Hamadan and other central provinces, thinking that they're serving their people. This caused subsidence in the country. That is, the aquifers depleted sharply. As you know, it's a phenomenon that is happening all over the world and is not specific to Iran. But this phenomenon of subsidence escalated in Iran and especially in Isfahan.
The plains of Isfahan province are among the most critical areas of the country in terms of subsidence. The province has 35 plains, and a significant increase in water withdrawal from aquifers and underground resources has sent 27 of the 35 into a pretty poor condition, so that any water extraction has been prohibited. Even the most populous city in West Asia, Tehran, home and host to some 15 million, is sinking into the ground at an alarming rate of more than 25 centimeters annually in some parts. Time for a short break. We'll be back in no time. Lake Urmia, once one of the world's largest saltwater lakes, became a symbol of environmental disaster in 2015. By that year, it had shrunk to no more than a tenth of its size. To feed rapid agricultural expansion in its vicinity, farmers resorted to pumping out deep groundwater for their crops, and numerous dams were built. This happened in the 1990s as a desperate answer to drought, but it was a regrettable waste because as a saltwater lake, Urmia was never suitable for drinking or agricultural use. There's plenty more to be said on the matter, plenty more than our full 25 minutes will allow even. And we will cover as much as we can in this episode, but first, a quick media review. And here it is. I mentioned Lake Urmia earlier, and how a lack of water flow into that lake had caused environmental damage. Now, migratory birds would agree, as they have been a major victim. Located in the northwest of Iran near the Turkish border, Lake Urmia was once the largest lake in the Middle East, but as the national news reported in 2014, it held just 5% of its original volume. while Lake Hamun in the Afghanistan border region was dry for more than a decade until recently. Now in 2021, Tehran Times reads, drought reduces water release into Lake Urmia. A shortage of water caused by drought across West Azerbaijan province reduced Lake Urmia's water intake by 400 million cubic meters during the last water year. That's September 2020 to 21. Last water year, it was predicted that 620 million cubic meters of water would be released into the lake, of which only 222 million cubic meters were achieved. This Yasser Rahbardin said. He's the head of West Azerbaijan province's regional water company. Pointing out that West Azerbaijan's dams are currently filled by only 30%, he stated that 50% reduction in snow reserves, lack of rainfall, warmer weather, along with the arrival of irrigation time for agricultural lands ahead of schedule, caused the water release to stop. Over the past 2 water years, when 700 million cubic meters were allocated to the lake due to good rainfall and snow storage, 2.4 billion cubic meters of water were provided, he stated. Here's what the Times of Israel has gathered. Tehran suffering worst drought in 50 years, says water supply official. 97% drop in rainfall has left 5 dams supplying the capital at just a third of their usual capacity for this time of year. Hydroelectricity generation has dropped by 40%. Iran's capital is suffering its worst drought in half a century, a water resources official said Tuesday, citing a 97% drop in monthly rainfall compared with last year. Groundwater and surface water are at a critical state. The 5 dams supplying water to the capital are at less than a third of their capacity, holding just 477 million cubic meters, under 17 billion cubic feet, that is, of water instead of 2 billion cubic meters of water. Before taking a look at Tasnim news, mangrove forests are a wonder of nature and one of many Iran has to boast. These wondrous trees come out like umbrellas every time the water goes down. Alas, dam construction and agricultural development have not spared even these wondrous trees, as they have reduced the inflow of fresh water, leading to the destruction of the mangroves. Mangrove forests grow where the fresh water of the river enters the salt water of the sea, creating a unique ecosystem in southern Iran, one of the most important habitats of this plant species. Located along the shores of the Persian Gulf, Hormozgan province has 20,000 hectares of these forests, 20,000 of 22,000 hectares covering the south of Iran. And the headline reads, less freshwater inflow into Persian Gulf threatens mangrove forests. Mangrove forests grow in parts of the Persian Gulf where fresh water enters the salt water of the sea and a unique ecosystem is created. But for several years, due to reduced freshwater inflow, the unbalance between salinity and freshwater has been a threat to the ecosystem. Experts believe that, of course, the drought and the lack of rainfall in the last 2 decades have paced up the depletion. And all these issues together endanger the lives of these valuable trees. That'll be it for the news segment. What of the impact of climate change? In April, the Iranian Meteorological Organization warned of an unprecedented drought and rainfall levels. While in oil-rich Khuzestan, residents took to the streets over water shortages, there were protests over hydroelectric power cuts in other cities. The government has responded with emergency assistance, but it's a chronic condition now. And Iran faces a range of environmental challenges, from high temperatures to pollution, flooding, and vanishing lakes.
I
believe those who've suffered losses because of the water crisis and those who've lost their livelihoods need to be identified. The people in any province, including Isfahan province, who are facing more dangerous problems, must be identified. Their families must be covered for damages caused by the water crisis and drought as soon as possible. They should receive a monthly payment as compensation for them to keep them afloat and above the poverty line.
The agricultural sector is one of Iran's most important economic sectors, and water is the most limiting factor for production and food security. More than 90% of renewable water in the country is used in agriculture, but because of low irrigation efficiency, about 50 to 60% of renewable water is lost in agriculture, causing agricultural water productivity to be very low.
با یک هزینه خیلی زیاد ما تونستیم 100,000 هکتار.
We managed to mechanize the irrigation of 100,000 hectares of agricultural land in Isfahan and Charmahal Bakhtiari and drastically reduce water loss by investing a large amount of money. But due to the faulty governance, nothing changed. Mechanizing irrigation is a great move, but as long as the water that's saved is used for other purposes, it should be allocated for drinking water or refeeding the aquifers. But unfortunately, the water that was saved was reused in the agricultural sector, expanding the industry even further.
Groundwater accumulated over time immemorial is found in aquifers below the Earth's surface and is a key source of water in Iran. And so this country suffers from one of the worst groundwater depletion rates in the world. That puts Iran next to India, Saudi Arabia and China, as well as the US. Pumping out groundwater at a faster rate than it is replenished can lead to increased levels of salt in the soil. And there is a very high salinity hazard for irrigation water in many areas of Iran. What's more, drought causes a domino effect, hence concerns over the drying up of wetland areas and rivers, which can trigger dangerous dust storms. Also, hotter and drier weather will automatically have a greater impact on hydropower generation. In 2018, water scarcity was an issue still possible to tackle. The government thinks it still is, looking at its efforts to change irrigation methods. Hopefully, those will be more than what's been called band-aid solutions. In addition to climate change, it's a lack of proper use of modern sciences and lack of attention to warnings by officials and experts about water shortages that have aggravated the situation. Long-term planning for results requires serious supervision on top of scientific studies and top-level managerial decisions as to whether to be an agricultural producing country or an importer of agricultural products conserving water resources. While Iran suffers a water shortage, it has invested thought and energy not only into water-intensive crops, but water-intensive industries, such as petrochemical industries, mining and steel. Sounds contrary, but America's determination to stop Iranian oil exports has resulted in this country looking for alternative sources of income. And water-intensive industries have eager customers in Asia, principally in China.
They
transferred the water from Zayandarud to Yazd province, arguing that it's an industrial province. The industrialized province saw an increase in its population. It's interesting to know that people in Yazd are very dissatisfied with the air pollution and the increased population due to the industrialization of the province. They've followed up on the matter through the province's Member of Parliament, but unfortunately, the industrial and water mafia outpower the people and the parliament member.
While we are on the topic of US sanctions, the impact of the Truman IV principles on the unbalanced development of countries such as Iran cannot be overlooked. US President of the 1940s and 50s, Truman called for aiding developing countries to catch up with modern science and industry. This would get these countries dependent on the US. Sure enough, it got Iranian farmers hooked on modern machines they'd need American assistance with. And American exports to Iran amounted to 20 times Iranian exports to America. America was even exporting to us items we were already producing ourselves. Anyhow, back to water per se. Water levels in the country's lakes and reservoirs have halved since last year due to the severe drought affecting the country and the wider region, a report from Iran's space agency said in October. And President Raeisi presents short and long-term solutions. The short-term solution goes as such. That is to be the fair distribution of the existing water resources and taking advantage of deep water resources. The latter of which has been one of the factors posing a danger so far. Now, how that plan is going to pan out in practice is to be seen.
راه حل بعدی هم که بنده باید اشاره بکنم خدمت شما.
The other solution I can suggest involves the country's dams. We should allocate 3 months to assess the damages the dams are doing to the environment, nature and the surface and underground water resources. They then need to be opened to release the water back to the nature and the environment.
That'll be it for today. Thanks for watching from the whole team. Do join us again at the same times next week to see where the currents will carry us next. Also remember, you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram via @Iran Today Show. Bye for now.